All right, so let's jump into something that's been all over the news lately. And, something that I think should be pretty interesting for you, given your, interest in U.S. politics, it seems like. The second Trump administration is shaping up to be a bit of a paradox. He ran on this whole populist wave,
Right.
championing the working class, railing against the elites. But his cabinet picks are telling a very different story.
That's interesting. Yeah, it does challenge our assumptions about what
Yeah.
populism actually means in
Yeah,
practice.
exactly. We've got a lineup that reads more like a Forbes list than a Drain the Swamp crew.
Yeah.
This recent Politico article, it really lays it all out. It's raising some serious eyebrows. For example, there's Howard Lutnick, major player on Wall Street, heading up the Commerce Department.
Yeah, and that's a department with a lot of influence over trade deals,
Yeah.
economic regulations,
Hmm.
areas where Lutnick's personal financial interests could potentially
Hmm.
be in play.
Right. Then there's Warren Stevens, another finance heavyweight, appointed as ambassador to the UK. You have to wonder, are his priorities going to be with American diplomacy or with his own investment portfolio?
And it's not just those two. We've got rumors swirling about Jared Isaacman
Yeah.
potentially heading NASA.
Wow. And Isaacman's background is primarily in payment processing and space tourism. It makes you think. Will he prioritize space exploration for scientific advancement or for commercial opportunities that could benefit his companies?
Yeah. And Steve Feinberg, a private equity giant known for his defense investments, might be tapped for deputy defense.
It's starting to look like a bit of a trend, isn't it?
It definitely raises questions about whether these individuals, with their immense wealth
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
complex business ties, can truly represent the interests of everyday Americans when their own financial empires are at stake with every decision they make.
Yeah. I mean, the Trump transition team, of course,
Of course.
insists that these are respected professionals, the best of the best, needed to make America great again. I can't help but think about the irony of that slogan in this context, Make America great again, with a cabinet seemingly handpicked from the Billionaires Club.
Yeah, that's certainly a perspective worth considering. The question then becomes, does expertise automatically negate the potential for conflicts of interest?
Right. Well, the Democrats are already sounding the alarm bells, pointing out that the sheer scale of wealth these individuals bring creates a whole new level of potential conflicts. Take Dr. Oz, the heart surgeon and TV personality, who's been tapped to run Medicare and Medicaid.
And his nomination is particularly interesting when you connect it to the bigger picture. He's been a vocal advocate for Medicare privatization in the past and has financial ties to private health insurers. That definitely raises concerns about how he might approach this role.
Right. It raises the question, is he going to be looking out for the millions of Americans who rely on Medicare and Medicaid? Or is he going to be looking out for the profits
Yeah.
of the private insurance companies he's connected to? Then there's Elizabeth Warren, who's been pretty outspoken about Scott Bessent, the hedge fund manager, who's Trump's pick for Treasury. She argues that he's more interested in helping the wealthy get wealthier than addressing the needs of everyday families.
And that raises a crucial point. How might someone's background unconsciously shape their policy decisions? Someone like Bessent, with such deep ties to Wall Street, could very well favor policies that benefit the financial industry, even if there's no intentional corruption involved.
I see what you're saying, but couldn't it also be argued that his insider knowledge of the financial system would be valuable in crafting effective regulations? It's a tricky situation for sure.
It absolutely is. You have this tension between expertise and the potential for bias. And it's even more complicated because sometimes that bias can be completely unconscious.
Right.
Speaking of Wall Street and potential biases, let's talk about Howard Lutnick again. He's got some interesting ties to Tether, a cryptocurrency firm that's been, shall we say, attracting a lot of controversy lately.
Oh, well.
Now Trump has made it clear that he wants to overhaul crypto regulations.
And with Lutnick at the helm of commerce, it's not a stretch to imagine that he could have some influence over those regulations. So if Lutnick influences crypto policy, could he pave the way for Tether to gain a dominant position in the market?
That's a pretty big if, but it's definitely a possibility worth considering. And then there's the Elon Musk situation, which is a whole different animal.
The world's richest person, essentially running his own mini government within the Trump administration. It's certainly unprecedented.
Exactly. This Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE as they call it, isn't bound by the usual rules and regulations of the federal government. That means Musk is essentially exempt from conflict of interest laws. It's an arrangement that has some people wondering whether his goal is really government efficiency or if it's about consolidating his own power and influence.
I mean, think about it. The potential for Musk to shape regulations and policies in ways that directly benefit his companies. Tesla, SpaceX, Starlink, we're talking billions of dollars at stake here, and he can do it all without worrying about those pesky legal repercussions.
Yeah, it really raises a fundamental question about our democracy. Should someone's wealth grant them this level of political influence, even if it's a
Technically
yeah,
legal. It's almost like he's Trump's personal efficiency guru, but with a level of power and autonomy that we've never seen before. And that has some people worried that he could use that power as a political enforcer for Trump, potentially silencing critics or pushing through policies that benefit him and his businesses.
exactly. And it's worth noting that this isn't the first time we've seen potential conflicts of interest arise from billionaire appointments. Remember Betsy DeVos, Trump's first education secretary?
Oh, yeah. The billionaire school choice advocate, her appointment definitely stirred up a lot of controversy.
Yeah, her critics argued that her policies were more about funneling money to for-profit education companies,
Yeah.
many of which she had ties to, than they were about improving public education for all students.
Right. And for our listener who may not be familiar, school choice is often framed as giving parents more options for their children's education. But critics argue that it can also lead to the defunding and weakening of public schools.
Right. And in DeVos's case, her background and financial interests fueled those concerns. It really brought the issue of trust to the forefront.
Yeah.
Can we trust that these individuals, with their immense wealth and complex business entanglements, will put the interests of the country ahead of their own personal gain?
It's a tough question to answer, and it's not just about individual intentions either. It's about the systems we have in place, the safeguards against conflicts of interest, and whether those systems are strong enough to withstand the pressures of concentrated wealth and power.
That's a key point. We're in uncharted territory here, and we need to be asking ourselves some tough questions about how we balance expertise with ethical considerations, and how we ensure that our government truly serves the people, not the plutocrats.
It feels like we're in the middle of a real-time experiment in governance, but unfortunately we don't have a control group to compare it to.
And that makes it all the more important to be vigilant, to closely scrutinize the actions of these appointees, and to hold them accountable for their decisions.
So what can we do? What's our role as citizens in all this? Do we just sit back and watch as the billionaires take over?
Absolutely not. Apathy is the enemy of democracy. We need to be active participants, to demand transparency, and to hold our elected officials accountable for their actions.
Transparency is key, right? It forces those decisions into the open, where we can all hold them accountable.
Exactly. We need to demand full disclosure of financial ties, to shine a light on potential conflicts of interest, and to scrutinize how those connections might be influencing policy decisions.
It's about asking tough questions, digging deeper, not accepting superficial answers.
And it's about having open and honest conversations about the role of wealth and power in our democracy, and about the potential consequences of having individuals with such vast fortunes shaping our government.
It's not about demonizing wealth, but recognizing the inherent challenges it presents when it comes to governance. And it's about demanding a system that prioritizes the interests of all citizens, not just a select few at the top.
Well said. It's about making sure our democracy truly serves the people, not the plutocrats.
That's a mission worth fighting for, wouldn't you say? But before we get too carried away with revolution, let's make sure we're giving our listeners some concrete takeaways from all this. First, there's this undeniable tension between Trump's populist message and his billionaire-packed cabinet.
A tension that raises serious questions about his priorities and the potential for conflicts of interest to drive his administration's agenda.
Right. Then we have specific concerns about nominees like Dr. Oz and Scott Bessent, whose past actions and financial ties raise real red flags.
Red flags that warrant our attention, and a healthy dose of skepticism.
And of course, there's the Elon Musk situation, which is unlike anything we've seen before. It's almost like a case study in how extreme wealth can potentially buy influence and reshape the very boundaries of our government.
It demands our attention and compels us to really consider the long-term implications for our democracy.
It's a mixed bag for sure. There's the potential for innovation and positive change, but also a lot of risks that we need to be very aware of. And it's interesting that despite all these concerns, the issue of conflicts of interest hasn't really taken center stage, especially among Republicans.
That's a point worth considering. Is it complacency? A belief that business acumen trumps ethical concerns? Or something else entirely?
It's a question worth pondering. You know, at the end of the day, the responsibility for safeguarding our democracy lies with all of us. We can't afford to be passive observers.
It's a shared responsibility. We need to demand accountability, transparency, and a system that prioritizes the well-being of all Americans, regardless of their wealth or status.
So to wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listener with a final thought. We've talked about the potential for conflicts of interest, the risks of concentrated wealth and power. But what about potential solutions?
That's the crucial question. What steps can we take to mitigate these risks? How do we ensure that our government truly serves the interests of all, not just a select few?
That's where the real work begins, right? It's not enough to just point out the problems. We need to think about how we can actually address them.
Absolutely. And I think it requires a multifaceted approach,
Mm-hmm.
tackling this from different angles. For starters, we need to take a serious look at our ethics laws and enforcement mechanisms. The current system, as we've seen, is clearly not equipped to handle the challenges posed by this new era of billionaire-influenced governance.
So we're talking about more than just symbolic gestures. We need real teeth in these regulations.
Exactly. We need stricter disclosure requirements for financial ties,
Yeah.
stronger conflict of interest rules, and enforcement mechanisms that have real bite. Right now, it seems like the consequences for violating these rules are often just a slap on the wrist for these ultra-wealthy individuals.
And maybe we need to think even bigger than that. Should individuals with such vast wealth even be allowed to hold positions of such immense power? I mean, democracy is supposed to be about representation, ensuring that everyone has a voice. But when you have individuals with such outsized wealth and influence, can we really say that the playing field is level?
That's a really thought-provoking question, and it's one that we as a society need to grapple with. It's not about demonizing wealth, but acknowledging that it can create an imbalance of power. That undermines the principles of democracy.
How do you even begin to regulate someone like Elon Musk? When his personal fortune rivals the GDP of some small countries, it feels almost impossible.
It's certainly a challenge, and it's why. In addition to strengthening our laws and regulations, we also need to empower citizens to hold their elected officials accountable.
So we need to be more than just voters. We need to be active participants in the process.
Exactly. We need to promote civic engagement, encourage critical thinking, and give people the tools they need to understand these complex policy issues.
That makes a lot of sense. If people are better informed, they can ask tougher questions, demand more transparency, and hold their representatives' feet to the fire, so to speak.
That's the idea. We need to create a culture of informed skepticism where we don't just blindly accept what those in power tell us, but instead demand evidence and hold them to the highest ethical standards.
I love that. A culture of informed skepticism. That should be the tagline for our democracy. But seriously, it feels like we've been focusing on the potential downsides. What about the potential upsides of having successful business leaders in government? Couldn't their experience and expertise actually benefit the country?
There's definitely potential for that. These individuals often bring valuable practical knowledge, an understanding of markets, and a knack for problem solving. But the key is to harness those strengths while also putting safeguards in place to mitigate the risks.
So it's not about excluding them entirely, but finding a way to make it work for the benefit of everyone, not just their own bottom line.
Precisely. And that's where informed, engaged citizens come in. We need to demand transparency, hold our leaders accountable, and make sure that the decisions being made are truly in the best interest of the country as a whole.
I think you've hit on something really important here. This isn't just about a few billionaires in the White House. It's about the future of our democracy. It's about who holds the power, who benefits from the decisions being made, and whether our system is truly serving the people. It's supposed to represent...
Well said. And ultimately, the responsibility for safeguarding our democracy rests with each and every one of us. It's not a spectator sport. It's a participatory process that requires constant vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge those who abuse their power.
We can't just sit back and hope for the best. We need to be active, engaged, and informed citizens if we want to protect the values and principles that our democracy is built upon. So for our listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, I hope we've given you not just information, but a sense of empowerment. The future is not predetermined. It's something we actively shape through our choices and actions.
That's a great point to end on. The power truly lies with the people. It's up to us to decide what kind of future we want to create and to hold those in power accountable for making that vision a reality.
Beautifully said. So to our listener, go out there, ask those tough questions, demand transparency, and let's work together to create a more just and equitable society for all. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world.